Hello.
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 Hi there, Richard. I'm going to
Hello.
just pause the music here 1 second. Actually, I can hear you. I'm going to turn you up a little bit. Are you using a video camera or are you just chatting today?
I can video if you want video, but I'm not much to look at.
If you don't feel comfortable doing that, there we go, Richard. We can see you live in the flesh. Wow, Richard.
As you see, I didn't turn you up.
I'm going to turn you up a little. Say something. Say hello or something.
Yeah, hello, la 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 la.
Guys, can you in the chat? Can you hear him? Okay, fine. Please let me know in the chat quick, and then we can move on. Look at all those wires and stuff.
Yeah, it's a lot of wires. lots of junk actually. I need to tidy up, but you know.
Excellent. Guys, can we hear Richard? Okay, please let me know in the chat. Sorry, Richard. There's a bit of delay with the chat coming through and stuff. A-okay here. Loud and clear. Excellent. Brilliant. Richard, first of all, thank you very, very much for taking time out of your busy day, I'm sure, fiddling with wires and electronics and bits and bobs to join us here tonight, mate. Where do we start? Okay, tell us about your early computing stuff. What was your first computer? Was it the Amstrad, or did you have something before that?
No, I had... what did I have first? Okay, so I think my dad got me a new brain, which nobody had. It's this like old Z80-based thing with a fluorescent display. And it was like very obscure, but this was like very early days. And nobody had one. And so I had one, but it was like, you know, this very obscure computer. My friend had a BBC Micro, though. So I remember going around to his house a lot to go and play with this BBC Micro. But yeah, before that, I mean, the thing is, when I was at school, this was all the time I was at school. I was like between sort of 12 and 15 kind of thing. I was born at just the right time because it was like the dawn of home computers, you know?
Yeah.
And so, and like my school had like some computers, but the only kids who were taught them were like some years behind me. Like I just missed being taught computers at school. But my friends had BBC Micro and I had a new brain stuff, which was just a weird computer, just black and white thing. And then, so I did a Space Invaders game for that for fun, and then just sort of learned how to do it in BASIC and stuff. And then then what happened? Oh, I'm trying to remember after that. There was something involving, there's a Memetech MTX, which was basically like a lot like an MSX. It's like a Z80 with a, you know, it was basically an MSX. And yeah, that just came out. Oh, that was it. The guy in the computer shop down the road heard I programmed stuff, and he was distributing these, so he lent me one, and I did a clone of Manic Miner on it, called, to my shame, Miner Dick, which you know, the innocence of youth, basically. You can still find it. It's like it's on the interweb somewhere. I might have even bought a copy on tape, but like it did like 1,000 copies or something, and it was like it was not a bad Manic Miner clone. And there's some videos of it somewhere, but like nobody bought it. And then but that's fine. And then, you know, but the thing is, it wasn't for money, it was for fun, you know. It was like, because you're all into like old games, and you know, you're like, you just want to got a computer and now you can do stuff.
Yeah, you just want to make your own version of it.
Yeah, and learn how to do it. And then so the Memetech also, so I had this like series of like computers that nobody else had. And then yeah, so I sent off the Memetech game, I think I sent off to Micropower, who was mostly a publisher who did BBC games, I think mostly. They did like Killer Guerrera and stuff like that. And I sent it off to them for some reason, and they were not interested, because it was like nobody has that computer, but they were like, oh, this Amstrad CPC thing has just come out, or is just coming out, and we have some of them, and do you want to do something on that? And we'll sell you one cheaply, I think was the deal. Like, we'll sell you a cheap Amstrad or something.
Ooh, wow.
Yeah, and I was like, okay, cool, and like a color one, and then so I got that. It was only just an Amstrad, like a CPC 464 was like a tape drive, and that's it basically, you know, just a raw thing.
Yeah.
I got that, and then so started doing a game on that, and I guess that's what turned into Fly Spy, I think. Yeah, that sounds about right. And then, and then for some reason Micropower weren't interested, or somehow that they kind of went away or stopped being a publisher, and so I just worked on it and just had fun, and then sent it off to Mastertronic. I'm not sure. I mean, with hindsight, maybe I could have sent it off to somebody else and said, hey, how about this as a full price game? But I don't know. I was just, you know, it's just Mastertronic, sure.
Yeah, you didn't know any better really at the time. You just Mastertronic was
like,
everywhere.
So, yeah, totally. I mean, and when you're a kid, it's just you know, you like it's like a crazy idea. Would you like my game? And they did, which was nice. And there was a guy there called Terry Owen who. So I was like 15. So there's a guy there called Terry Owen who was a lovely bloke who and they had a thing they called it the magic mailbox, right? Where kids would literally just get jiffy bags with cassette tapes in on a regular basis. People would literally like me just send their game in.
Yeah.
On the tape with like a handwritten thing in pencil going, please, is my game, please publish my game or something. And obviously most of these were either didn't work or they were, so there's a big pile of them in the office. But anyway, so they go through it eventually and they pull some out and then they publish some of them. And so I went up to London to go and talk to them, which was cool. And they had an office in central London in Paul Street, as I recall. And it's quite a small outfit. I mean, there's like maybe 15 people or something in this kind of nondescript office, and all older people, like no kids. It's very much a business thing.
Sure.
And it was run by these three Jewish guys who all knew each other and had been in lots of businesses together, like older guys, including Frank Herman, who went on to do lots of things, and Alan Sharam and some other people. I think Jeff, what's his name as well? Various people. Anyway, who sort of stayed in the industry for a while. Anyway, the point is that they Frank Herman had previously been involved in porn movies, I think, amongst many other
Good grief.
Yeah, well, just like businessman, just this guy.
Is that where Minor Dick comes from?
No, that would have been an alternate career. But anyway, so because of that, so he was one of these businessmen people who just saw a business, and he knew like duplicate. This is like in the days of VHS tapes. So he had this like setup out in the back of on an airfield somewhere in a hangar, as I recall, which was for duplication, and he'd done his videos there, and then he set up to do cassette tapes, and basically, so that was their kind of pet duplicator.
Yeah.
Because obviously, when you're doing budget games, every cent counts, kind of thing. You're trying to save money on everything.
Oh, of course, yeah. Such small profit margins, yeah.
Yeah, so you own your own cassette manufacturing, which is not a big deal, and yeah, so I went up there a few times. Anyway, so they liked my game and then published it, and then so this is Fly Spy, and then amazingly printed all the kind of like they were like write some stuff for the inlay. Some copy for the inlay, and I just wrote this like amazing jabbering page.
Yes, I read it. I love that. It was.
And they put it in there, and I was like, I was kind of, even as a kid, I was like, what? Really? You just put it in there like that? Yeah, I mean, it's not like an artist statement.
The story was like something like some angry little kid in Scunthorpe has blown up his Amstrad, and he's angry at Alan Sugar and all this kind of stuff, and it's like, yeah, crazy stuff. It's good.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly, yeah. I was young, It seemed funny at the time, but anyway, so they published that, and that was cool. And I think they did, in fact, try and get a Commodore 64 port done at some point, but it went badly.
Oh.
Which is not surprising, really. It's not the kind of game you could put on a 64. Whatever, they tried, but it fell apart and they didn't publish it.
And there's an awful lot in your game of lots of different, it'd be hard to port, I would think, because there's so much stuff going on. That's just
and the Commodore 64 is often really only good at Commodore 64 specific titles because of the way the video stuff all works.
Yeah,
it's like it's good at what it does, and it's often not good at things.
Yes,
but the window of time kind of passed. It was something they tried once, and then, but it's not like this is very much a sort of pile them high and sell them cheap type operation, as you would imagine, logically. And so they were just like they're publishing many games, like a couple of games a week or whatever, just banging them out, and they'd get conversions done. Or if they could, and then try and launch on multiple formats, because obviously that was a good idea business-wise. And then if it didn't, then something else comes along, and it's all just moving fast. They didn't have a lot of skin in the game. I mean, they didn't spend any money on advertising. It was all about the distribution. Obviously, they're kind of the reason that they were successful was not that no one had thought of doing cheap games. It's that they already had a distribution network for distributing to like petrol stations and like corner stores.
Yes.
That kind of
thing,
right?
Getting them in newsagents and things that games never went to before. They got them in petrol stations, like you said. Yeah.
Right. And the thing is, again, when the games are so cheap, there's not really any fat margins for anybody. So it's got to be fairly direct. It was pretty much Mastertronic. They had their own manufacturing, and then they distribute. And I think they had their own distribution and stuff. You can imagine. And so just huge volume, basically, was the idea.
Yeah.
And obviously the actual content of what went in the games was really low priority. I mean, a really low priority.
They didn't really care.
It was kind of, and the thing is, these were old Jewish guys, and they didn't play games, nor did they care about them. Like if some kid got excited, they're like exactly what you would what record industry people are portrayed like.
Yeah.
And not, but maybe with less drugs and slightly less mean. They were kind of nice, actually. Frank Herman was lovely. He was this kind of like, paternal kind of grandfathery guy who mostly lived in the cafe across the street, I think, and people would they'd go and get Frank from the cafe. But yeah, anyway, so they did all the game. They didn't really care about the content particularly, but you know they were happy to get the magic mailbag, which is random submissions from people, and then they also kind of groomed some people who were very productive. They found, like the Darlings, for example. They found some developers who would just bang out games, and that was great. So those people would get a better royalty deal as well. Although I think my deal was like 10 pence a tape. I think was pretty typical.
Oh, I was about to ask you about being vulgar. Yeah. I mean, did you get paid for it, or was it just on like pure sales and then the percentage?
I think it was I didn't really haggle because I was a kid and I was like, wow, really? But I think it's from what I recall, I got 10 pence a tape, and of course it retailed at £1.99, so it's like 5%, and then I think I got £1,000 advance, and I think it sold about 40,000 units, which apparently was reasonably good.
Yeah, that's actually quite good. Yeah. I think the highest selling Mastertronic game was Formula One Simulator, and it was like about 500,000 copies. But that was across all formats. So 40,000 on the Amstrad.
Wildly popular. Yeah, it's not a wildly popular format compared to like the Spectrum or something. Yeah.
No, but I think 40,000 is actually very, very respectable. Yeah.
I guess. Yeah. I mean, actually, so that was not, I mean, I'm just amazed that anybody remembers it, because I mean, it was like this. Actually, it wasn't really designed, obviously. It just kind of came into being out of some stuff that I was messing. Like, obviously, the teleport sub game is just because I fancied writing a centipede thing and I had to kick it around. And the speech at the start was because I read that in some Amstrad magazine. They were like, "Try this," and I was like, "Oh yeah, I'll try that." And I was like, "Cool."
Yeah.
And there was some buffer. They didn't take any space because there was some buffer it needed. I think it used the space that we used for all the variables when the game was running was used we loaded in as the speech, and then it would play the speech, get rid of it, and then use it for the game stuff.
Oh right, nice.
So it's kind of spare space. Yeah.
Cool. So you do remember some like technical programming details from building the game, or is it very, very fuzzy in the memory?
No, well, I mean, it kind of comes back a bit now talking about it. It's weird though. It'd be useful to get rid of that now because I really don't need that information.
It's like a valuable space.
Could use the brain cells for something else now.
Sure.
But yeah, I mean, I did it on most of it. I did at least half of it, more than that, on just like doing it on one machine with a cassette deck, which is a nightmare, of course, because every time it crashes, it reboots and you lose everything you were working on. And of course, that happens all the time. So, and then of course, you have to rewind the tape and hope you saved it recently, and then hope that the copy on tape loads. Otherwise, you have to go and find an older copy if you still got one, and then try and remember what changed. And no version control or anything.
God.
Yeah,
I guess it took you a long time to make then. Or how long do you reckon it took you from start to finish, Fly Spy?
I don't know. Maybe 6 months or something. 4 to 6 months. I mean, it's hard to define finished as well. I guess I just ran out of map to fill in, basically. Like, watching you do the map, I was like, I vaguely remember doing that, and I guess I just kind of fiddled with it enough, and I couldn't fit any more in. So I was like, well, I guess it's done now.
Well, you definitely filled every little bit of space on that map. Quite a busy map, but yeah. So it took about 6 months, and then what was I going to ask? We'll come back to Fly Spy again. Let's move on to something else. So how did you? I believe the next game you did was Shinobi. Is that correct, or was there anything in between?
No, there were several things in between. So Fly Spy was like my sort of intro to the business, and then. What did I do? I think, and then obviously Mastertronic were happy to like what else can you do, basically. And I did, what did I do? I did a conversion or something. I got a Commodore 64 as well. And I did, there's a game called Ultimate Combat Mission, I think, which was some vertically scrolling shooter that I converted from something to the 64. And I made it, because I still have my Amstrad as well. I set up a cross-assembler thing so I could write code on the Amstrad and like 6502 assembler on the Amstrad and assemble it on the Amstrad and then send it down a cable to the Commodore 64, which was awesome. Like a whole, because then when your target machine crashes, then you don't lose what you're working on, which is nowadays obvious, but at the time was a nightmare.
Yes.
So I think I sort of I definitely did more Amstrad stuff. What I mostly did on the Amstrad was a lot of mastering, because around that time when I was doing bits and pieces for Mastertronic, they said we need someone to help out in-house and do all the kind of technical stuff in-house because none of us know anything. And do you want to come and do that? And by that time I was like 16, I think 17. So I was just I'd done my O-levels.
And you done Fly Spy when you were 15. That's right, wasn't
it? Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So Fly Spy was just kind of like coming into my O-levels, I think, and then maybe there was something else. There was a conversion of like UMC or something, and then as a quick contract gig while doing my O-levels, and then I was going to go and do my A-levels. Or I think I started actually. I was doing bits and pieces, and then but anyway, around the time I was 17, like soon after my A-levels, I think I started sixth form or something, and then they offered me a job, and I was like, Mum and Dad, do you mind if I quit school and go and do this job and move to London? And they were very cool about it, actually. They were like, well, sure. And they could see I was really into it. And I remember my mum saying, well, bear in mind that while this is great now, at some point you might get tired of it or not want to do it anymore. And then, you need something to fall back on, kind of thing. And so,
yes.
parent advice.
The usual, yes, yeah.
Yeah, but unfortunately I've just fallen back on the same thing, so I'm basically just still doing geeking. But anyway, so I got for the job in London, and even though I was like 17, and the guy who worked at Mastertronic, who was in charge of the little room where they did, production stuff, who was a guy called Terry Owen, who was a lovely guy, he sort of took me under his wing, and I ended up living over the street from him. I got a little flat across the street, and then we did that, and I worked at Mastertronic for at least a year.
Oh, of course, yes, you did. We talked about this about a few years ago. It's been written on the internet that you wrote a game called Killer Cobra for Mastertronic.
No.
But it wasn't you. Your name is in the code, but I think you wrote the copy protection or the loader for it. So it's been mistakenly credited to you, the game, but I think.
Yeah, I did bits and pieces. I think Mastertronic would just ring me up asking me to do stuff when I was at home, like, can you sort out this particular, can you master this game or sort this problem out or whatever.
Yeah.
And then eventually they just said, well, can you come and do it in-house because it's much more convenient. So yeah, I did loads of mastering stuff for them, and so I touched lots of games. And of course I did Invader Load on the Commodore 64. Was like probably my most widely known thing ever because it was on so many games.
There'll be a few Commodore 64 fans in here tonight probably going, oh my god, yes.
Yeah, like that. I mean, more people must have seen that than anything else, I think, just because it was like used on zillions of things.
Even I know that, and I didn't have a Commodore, and I'm an Amstrad guy, and I've heard of Invader Load, and the legend of it, yeah.
So I was sort of in-house at Mastertronic doing that, and just doing various things. Like I did some Amstrad stuff, and I did some, a bunch of mastering things, and all sorts of things really there. And then so I didn't really do any games really. That was more kind of just working for Mastertronic. But then Mastertronic being a publisher, right? So they had, they were also trying to move up market, right? Because they knew that margins were limited in the 199 thing, and also Codemasters were starting to compete with them, because all Codemasters were the darlings, of course, who used to work for them.
Yeah.
So they wanted to go up market a bit because they already had the distribution. So therefore, if you can sell a higher margin product through the same channel, then you're like awesome. So they bought Melbourne House, who weren't doing very well. As a publisher for them, they'd overextended themselves and something went wrong. So they picked up Melbourne House. Mm-hmm. And Melbourne House. Oh,
that was it. They tried to get into the arcade business. They tried to do the Arcadia system, which was like an Amiga inside an arcade cabinet.
No, that was actually Mastertronic doing that with the Melbourne House name. So,
right. I'm close. I'm near, but I thought it was the Arcadia thing that very nearly bankrupted.
I was there at the time they were doing that thing, and it didn't work out well.
Right, yeah.
But it was just an Amiga, basically, an Amiga motherboard with like with a couple of bits and pieces out of it. But basically, it was an Amiga. But the problem with that was that they got the content they got done was not very good for a start. I mean, the Amiga was capable of doing an arcade quality game at the time. Basically, you look at what people did with it. But they at the time, American programmers weren't very good at video game optimization compared to UK programmers. I think it's because we'd had a harder life, like Sinclair Spectrum and stuff, and ZX80 and things like you.
Wobbly RAM packs and stuff,
Oh god, the whole thing, and the fact that they were like almost toy machines in terms of the hardware, and so and American stuff didn't tend to be like that so much. But anyway, whatever. The stuff that they got, which was one of the guys behind the Arcadia thing was American, and I think he had some contacts, and so they got a bunch of stuff developed in America that wasn't very good in a nutshell. And just was not that impressive compared to arcade games at the time. And then they also found the whole business thing was harder than they thought. So that was just kind of diversion for them, really.
Sure.
They had Melbourne House anyway. They picked up the label, and Melbourne House already at the time had negotiated for Double Dragon license with Technos or wherever they were, and so Mastertronic were now effectively doing high end games as well. So they acquired Melbourne House, and so they farmed out. So they were like, okay, who's going to do development of the ports? And so they gave it to Binary Design, who was one of their favoured developers, although not owned by them. But Binary Design in Manchester, who had a whole sweatshop in the nicest sense of people.
Yes.
And they did a bunch of stuff for Mastertronic. They did a bunch of stuff for everybody basically. But then so they got given the Double Dragon conversion, which was kind of a big deal because it was like worth all this money, and specifically, of course, that Christmas was coming up, right? And Christmas is everything, obviously, in the industry. So while I was at Mastertronic during my sort of year or so there, I ended up as the only person who sort of knew anything about technical stuff. I got sent to Manchester to go and make sure that it was all working out and that it wasn't going off the rails because it had to be done by Christmas.
Sure.
And I'm probably jumping forwards in time here because that definitely involved an Amiga and ST version as well.
Yes.
So yeah, so I turned up there and the Amiga guy, anyway, for some reason the Amiga guy did not work out. So I ended up taking over that and I just lived in Manchester for a while and did the Amiga version of Double Dragon alongside, the guide and ST version and things. Anyway, so that then it's jumping around in the weird thing is I then went back to doing Amstrad stuff afterwards.
I know.
I think that sounds right. I mean, in the sense, so
that makes sense because I think the Amiga version had the arcade graphics rips from the arcade board, and then it was converted to the ST. Then the ST was converted to the Amstrad. Is that right? Is that
well, no, that was before the days when people ripped the graphics. I mean, what they did is they used a frame grabber. So they had an Amiga with a monochrome frame grabber, like it was just a composite video input.
Yeah.
And they lashed up to the arcade board, and it worked really badly. It was terrible, but it kind of gave you a monochrome image of the arcade display, captured at whatever point.
Yeah.
Which wasn't actually that much use. Because it was, so basically they would kind of use that as a rough backdrop and then basically redo everything.
Yeah.
So they had a bunch of artists who would do that, and so, but this was an attempt to automate it, So for the sprites, they would try and cut them out in D-Paint and then recolor them and then, put the color in.
So you'd have the outline of the sprites, and you could have all the frames of animation then, and you get the animation right, but the colors you couldn't do the colors.
Right.
But yeah.
And I think possibly the logic was that because obviously this is a production place, right? It's about doing work for money and not going bust. So I think one of the ideas was that what they could say when you're doing conversion, that enables you to say to the publisher, the graphics are the same as the arcade machine. Right, okay, I recolored them by hand, but the thing is the pixel outline is the same, and his head's not bigger and his arms aren't too long,
Sure, yeah.
Right. So, although it still fell by the wayside of it, but anyway, so that was the idea behind that. They weren't really grabbed; they were kind of grabbed, and then I think the background, most of it was redone in practice. And then so I did the Amiga version, and then I ended up getting poached by them because I was up at Bunbury Design for a while, like working on their stuff as a Mastertronic employee just to get stuff out the door.
Yeah.
And then we finished Double Dragon, and then they were like, oh, well, why don't you quit Mastertronic and come and run one of our studios, which is kind of a grandiose name for like 3 guys in a room in Bristol. But I was from Bristol. I'd grown up in Bristol, so I was like, okay, cool.
Oh, that works out well, yeah.
Yeah, so I basically went back to Bristol and ended up, and that was the Shinobi time, really. So I turned up and the guys in Bristol had just got the Shinobi license, or the Shinobi conversion gig, which was for the sales curve, I think. And that was really fun, right? So I love Shinobi. Shinobi is one of the best games I think that I ever converted in terms of being a really fun arcade game.
Oh, I love it to bits. We all do here as well. Yeah.
It's like, I'm by myself, it's kind of heretical, but I'm not a big fan of Double Dragon or Final Fight or those kind of beat 'em ups. I'm not. I don't find. I know people are really attached to them, and certainly I get a lot of abuse about the Final Fight conversion on the Amiga, but to me, I'm like, you go and play it on MAME now, and it ain't no great shakes. It's not like a fantastic, amazing game. It's you walk along and you hit people, and it's kind of like, the graphics are nice, but
I guess it's the kind of it's like the monotonous of it. You just kind of just sink into it. It's like a lazy Sunday afternoon where you don't have to engage the brain too much. Maybe that's what it is. I don't know. Maybe people in the chat will tell us as well. But I can't. Yeah.
It's not inherent in fighting games though, is it? You think about like International Karate on the Commodore 64 or Street Fighter or something, and those games are like awesomely good to play. Like they're really, really
yeah,
nice.
because it's engaging the brain as well, and reflexes and timing and all that kind of stuff. Whereas Final Fight, you're just walking along, punching and kicking, and just that's all doing. Yeah.
But on the other hand, I know a lot of people loved it a lot, but it's kind of a shame that I didn't love it more. I guess to be honest, I would have probably paid more attention to the gameplay stuff, and really what I was in it for me. Well, I wasn't in it for me, but I was in it for the technical challenges. And so, like, Final Fight was really nice technically on the Amiga. I had all sorts of like clever stuff in it that I was really pleased with.
Yeah.
But But then anyway, so this is kind of the chronological thing that gets weird, and I can't remember where Amstrad CPC Double Dragon 1 and 2 came in, because I definitely did them much later on than other stuff, and I can't remember why. That's the odd thing.
The thing
like,
is,
what logic?
Go on, sorry.
I'm trying to think what and this is a kind of mystery, isn't it? Because there's famously, not famously, but there's 2 versions of Amstrad Double Dragon.
Yes.
Like
make it even more. Oh, unfortunately, yeah. Yeah, that makes it even more confusing. I mean, that was one of my questions. Was going to be why did the Amstrad get a 128K disc version?
I think I'm piecing it together here. I should be able to remember, but it's one of those like things that slipped my memory. But I think what happened is that the 128K CPC version of Double Dragon 1 and 2, which was super fun to do, happened much later, and because that happened after Virgin had bought Mastertronic.
Yes.
Right. So there's a whole thing going on, right? So
the original Double Dragon came out on Melbourne House, but your version came out on
which was owned by Mastertronic, right? And at the time, some time passed between that. I mean, I think it must have been the case that the Amstrad versions of DD that I did that came out were probably like 2 years later or something. I don't even know. But I mean, they still had the license, so they just wanted to make some money out of it, I think. But I mean, as for why they, I mean, I was amazed. I remember being surprised so at this point, right? So at this point, Virgin had bought Mastertronic. I had left Mastertronic and was working for Binary Design, I guess. Yeah, but I still hung out with Mastertronic, and then they moved into Virgin's offices, which was sweet, and got sort of taken over by them. And then Virgin were like, oh yeah, we want a version of Double Dragon 1 and 2, and I was like, and then they were like 128K only, and I was like, really? Do you actually want to do that? It seems like a slicing your market up a lot, but they were like, yeah. So I was like, okay, cool.
Maybe they saw the French market. There was a big French market, but
I have no idea how it sold. I mean, I never got any sales figures on any of that stuff. So,
yeah.
But it was super fun to do, and obviously they're basically technology-wise they're essentially the same game. Like you can see they're practically identical, as I recall.
Yes.
The DD1 is definitely the same code, and that was fun to go back to the Amstrad because that was after doing, like Amiga Double Dragon and various other things. And the Amstrad does have its charms in terms of like tricks you can do on it and like as a piece of hardware.
Sure.
And one of them was that yeah, basically you can do compressed sprites on it quite well, which wasn't that commonly done. Like, so there's a couple of issues you got, right? I mean, with really, like a lot of 8-bit programming, when people think about 8-bit computers, I'm just going to ramble here.
Go for it. No, we're all loving it here. We're all loving it. Carry on. Yeah.
So if you think about like the Spectrum versus the Commodore 64 versus like the Amstrad, which are kind of the big three at the time, and they were very different in terms of what you could do with them and how you program them, like radically different. And it wasn't really the CPU that was something to do with it, but it was more about the video hardware, because that's really what you're mostly concerned with. That's the hardest thing that your computer is doing, is generating a video display by a long shot.
Yeah.
So and then and like back in the ZX80 days, they actually did it just in software, and you see how that works out. You have to have some hardware, otherwise it's unusably crappy.
Yes.
And then what they did on the Amstrad. So the Amstrad was done. The Amstrad was designed relatively unimaginatively by a team with Roland Perry and people who did it for, and like we all know what Alan Sugar is like, right? And nothing against Alan Sugar, but Alan Sugar sensibly has a focus on business and wanted to, and he would have had a budget and a time frame and everything else, and not tolerant of it not getting done, right? So, and the design of the Amstrad CPC was definitely just a Amstrad contract gig, as they did all the time. I mean, that's how they got their stereos done and their whatever. They just and so in this case, although it wasn't anything to do with that team, but I did actually meet Roland Perry at one point. But looking at the hardware design, it's perfectly adequate for the constraints they had. There's not much clever in there, and things like that. And the video controller, which is 6845, is a very off-the-shelf standard kind of part, and they didn't really do much else with it. So it's quite a limited machine. But the bells, it doesn't really have any great bells and whistles, or at least it has a proper sound chip. But the thing that matters most when you're doing games is like you had no hardware. I mean, okay, the Commodore 64 had some hardware, and that's all it had. But then on the Spectrum and the Amstrad, you're basically drawing on the screen with the CPU, and that's almost all of your time is spent doing that. Like a tiny amount of time is spent actually doing game logic. Almost all of it is just moving the screen around and drawing stuff. Yeah. So. And so the efficiency with which you can do that when you want to make a game, and games generally want similar kind of things. They would like scrolling, and they certainly want sprites. And then what it really boils down to then is this, like, how much can you squeeze out of a completely fixed hardware design? And like on the Spectrum had a whole bunch of compromises, and the most annoying thing with that was when you wanted to move things smoothly around the screen, you had to bit shift the graphics, because they were storing 8 pixels in a byte.
Yes.
Like horizontally.
Yes.
So if you want something to move smoothly, you have to kind of like move things around within bytes and move them. And as they fall off the end of one byte, you have to put them on the start of the next byte. And you end up spending, and it's very tedious to do. And you remember that like early Spectrum games, things would move around by like 8 pixel boundaries simply because you didn't have to do that. But it's kind of nasty result. So, and that was a huge pain in the ass. And then the fact you couldn't scroll the screen is what you had all these problems with it. So you were Spectrum programmers who were very clever would spend huge amounts of effort and blood, sweat, and tears fighting something that was basically extremely primitive. Now the Amstrad was actually equally primitive in a lot of ways. It equally didn't have any. I mean, it had hardware scrolling of a sort. But actually, the most useful thing they did on the Amstrad was mode 0, which everybody used, the 16 color mode, the blocky one.
Yes.
Was that only stored 2 pixels in each byte, right? And this which is rather than 8. So the thing is, if you move things 2 pixels at a time, it doesn't look too bad. And you'll see that almost every Amstrad game ever written, all the sprites move in 2 pixel increments in mode 0. Because that means that you don't have to do any of this like shimmying around of the bits. You just go bing, 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 and it looks good enough. If you did it on a Spectrum, it looks ridiculously chunky because 8 pixels. On Amstrad, it's only 2 pixels. So it'll probably be rarely that if you go and look, then you'll find Amstrad games that do move on a pixel boundary in mode 0, because why would you? It's just so much hassle. So anyway, whatever. I mean, ramble. But the nice thing is that the Amstrad is really all about how fast you can work with this display, which is relatively large. I mean, the Spectrum display was, I think, 6K, and the Amstrad was like almost double that, 12K or something, I don't know. And you had a similar CPU, so you're spending all this time like, drawing pixels on the screen, running around doing stuff. But the nice thing is the Amstrad let you do it more efficiently, because you could just ignore the bit shifting stuff and just deal with bytes everywhere. And then your code could run much faster.
Well, that's very interesting, because you did very bespoke versions of your games for the Amstrad. You weren't like porting ZX Spectrum code. So the Amstrad, as you probably know, got an awful lot of specky ports, as we call them, and we get very upset by them. And they all they scroll the same as the specky, they move the same as the specky, but they're often a lot slower because they're using specky code. They're not doing, I assume, what you're talking about with just moving the bits two by two, if you know what I mean. Because
exactly.
You've done your own version, like you've not used any specky code. You've done it how it should be. And that's why we get smooth sprite movement and scrolling in Shinobi and Double Dragon and stuff like that. And everyone at the time was like, "Oh my god, the Amstrad can scroll. The Amstrad can move the sprites nice and fast and smoothly." You know, we weren't getting a specky port, but essentially, if you program to the machine's strengths, you're going to get good results. It's quite simple, but businessmen back in the time didn't want to dedicate the time and resources to doing own versions of Amstrad games. It had to be, well, we got the specky code, it's a Z80, it's a pretty similar computer, just bong it over. And that's what we suffered. But but
then you think about, there's one thing that's not widely appreciated is how much of a business this was for everybody. Like, you know, and if you've got the Spectrum code and you can make it run on Amstrad, given that programmers are hard to find as well, if you can get that conversion done and you've got a product, then it's twice as good as not having a product. Well, it's a million times better than having no product. So, but they're very much like that. Yeah, and also the quality of the product was not that strongly correlated to how many it sold. As you know, like it's about you look at what the Darling brothers cracked quite quickly with Codemasters was exciting titles for games. BMX Simulator Pro Plus XXL kind of thing. That kind of stuff. And they were really into that initial marketing. Like they understood that whether you decide if you're going to buy this game like very quickly, and really when especially budget games, they're very consumable and throw away. And people, here's the classic funny story from Mastertronic days was once I did Invader Load on the Commodore 64. I remember people ringing up to complain about they bought 2 different games and they were the same game. And they were like, I got this game and it's Space Invaders, and I got this other game and it's also Space Invaders. And I'm like, what the hell?
Was yours better as well, probably?
Well, but the thing is, like, they would say, it's perfectly good and I liked it, the Space Invaders. I was just wondering why both games are the same. And but I guess it was people. As games got more expensive, and especially as the hardware got better, then people expected more. Yeah, and I think certainly with full price Spectrum titles and that kind of thing, there were some pretty good Spectrum and Amstrad games, some really nice, lovely graphics and the rest of it. But you were talking about the scrolling thing. Actually, the one thing, of course, that Amstrad does have hardware scrolling, as FlySpy uses it, but it's clunky in a lot of ways and very hard to use it. Basically, your life ends up easier if you do what we did in Shinobi and Double Dragon and everything else, which is just redraw the screen as fast as you possibly can, and that allows you to scroll it around as well. Because you can. That also means that when you're drawing the sprites, you don't have to undraw the sprites. You don't have to clear up after them. You just basically redraw the whole screen and then draw the sprites on top, and just do that as fast as you can all the time.
So you're basically trying to save as many seats as you can. Is that the gist of it? I'm not much programming minded, but yeah.
Yeah, cool. We'll just do everything as quickly as humanly possible, and then fit it in a small amount of space as possible.
Sure. Okay, Okay, so then your code that you did for basically the background code for like Shinobi and Double Dragon, that got reused in things like Final Fight on the Amstrad and eSWAT. Is that correct?
I think so. Yeah, I'm not sure about Final Fight. eSWAT, I'm pretty sure a friend of mine did who worked at Binary Design, and I'm pretty sure he would have used my code.
Yeah,
and it certainly looks like it.
Yeah,
and I'm like, cool, okay.
Final Fight seems it just feels like your code, if you know what I mean. But it is very slow. So and eSWAT as well, that suffered with a lot of slowdown.
Yeah,
so
I think they just made the sprites too big in that, because they use the thing is that code base on that particular code base supports compressed sprites, right? So all the sprites in Double Dragon and all those games are all compressed, which means you can get away with them making them bigger, basically.
Right.
And decompress them on the fly when it draws them, which is another nice Amstrad trick you can do that's like Amstrad specific, in that it makes sense that you can basically, like if you've got a character where it's standing and it's punching like that with his arm straight out, you can afford to encode the whole thing as one big rectangle, because the sprite is compressed, and when you draw it, it automatically skips all the blank areas, which saves memory and makes it run faster as well.
Of course.
And so they got a bit carried away with that, I think, on the eSWAT, and they just like slapped in the Amiga graphics or something, and they were like huge, and it still worked, but it was very slow.
Yes, yeah, pretty much, yeah. Do you think your code was using any other games on the Amstrad?
There wasn't really that. I doubt it, because I mean, this was way pre-internet, and you'd actually have to get the code off somebody on a disk and have them explain how it worked. So it's pretty rare that it was usually a hand. You'd give somebody and explain it to them, and of course, everybody as well. We were all a bunch of kids, and we all wanted to write it ourselves as well.
Yeah, of course.
Because then you learn how to do it.
Pride there involved in. Yeah.
It's more about learning. It's not so even just pride. It's because once you've written it, then you know what the problems are and how it works, and everybody wants to increase their knowledge and know more stuff.
Oh, of course, yeah. So what was the controversy of the Final Fight on the Amiga? There, you mentioned it earlier. So there was some people that hated it, some people that loved it. Is that?
I haven't met anybody who loved it. There were lots of people who hated it. Like especially on if you go on YouTube, people are just like mean.
Oh.
And I think I really really pissed on someone's cornflakes or something. I mean, it's not terrible. I agree, it's not tremendously good, and I think mostly what it is that people feel particularly disappointed because in some areas it's pretty great. Like technically, it's not bad at all. I think it's got some really good tricks in there, as I say so myself, because that was like the pinnacle of my Amiga games, and I put I did lots of things I wanted to do, and finally got around to doing them, and was sort of given enough time to do it. So it's technically, I think it's about as good as you can do, but gameplay wise, it's less fun than the arcade machine, and I was not a huge fan of the arcade machine. And it doesn't have any music in the game, which was just some huge screw up. Basically, that was because they didn't do any music.
Oh, right.
Simple. Like, are you going to do some music? And they were like, yeah, we'll go into that. And then so there's no music at all. And then it was like, well, you've got this cool intro and these graphics can whoosh, and it looks like the arcade machine, but it's completely silent. Like you're not feeling we're missing something here.
Right.
So I ended up putting in Jolien Meyer's music from that demo, whatever it was. Was it called Lost in Time or something? Like amazing piece of music from this Amiga demo, and I stuck it in there as a placeholder, and then I sent it off to them going, look, it's really good with music, and then they released it.
Fair enough. Chat, don't worry, chat, I'm not ignoring you. I've seen there's a lot of people itching to ask questions. In fact, shall we do that, Richard? Is that okay? Shall I let the chat ask you some questions? So chat, you can start flying in some questions to me, and I'll ask Richard of them. Ask Richard those questions. There is one above. I spotted it, and I was going to mention it. I mean, have you seen any of the recent kind of productions on the Amstrad that's come out in the last few years? Like, anything at all?
I'm not a huge retro head, although I was amazed that some people did some stuff on the Spectrum that was amazing, like real-time streaming of stuff and all sorts of things. I noticed that people had bypassed the hardware scrolling problem on the Amstrad. They looked like they'd figured out that you could actually split the screen properly and just freely scroll around, which was awesome. And I would have loved to have had that. That would have been great, but it was like a totally undiscovered thing at the time. I mean, it's still an interesting machine. Sure. I'm weirdly not as nostalgic about old machines as some people are, because I just see them as collections of hardware decisions that were made at the time, usually for cost or whatever reasons. Like I wouldn't say that about the Amiga especially, though. That is like a labor of love in terms of like that was one of the greatest machines. The Commodore 64 was very nice, but the Amiga, like you could tell it was a whole team of people who just loved doing what they were doing and had all these great ideas and got to do most of them, which is really cool.
Yeah, you can see the passion in it. Yeah.
But now I do hardware stuff. So now I'm all like, it's a real shame if the Amstrad doesn't have all these things that could have easily been done. You know, if I could go back in time and do the Amstrad chip myself, I'd be like, yeah.
Yeah, indeed. There's this. I don't know. Are you watching the stream at the moment, Richard? Is it on your computer?
Yeah. I'm seeing myself delayed.
No worries. What I might pull up is people asking. I think people are asking me to show you this, if you don't mind. There's this new game that's coming out very shortly called Vespertino, which is this like awesome kind of outrunny type game.
That's not an easy game to do.
Oof. Let me just find. Okay, I've got the video. I'm gonna just bring up.
I used to just design websites for my clients.
Okay, now it's popping up now. Sorry, 1 second. I'm gonna have to mute this. Yeah, people are saying check out the Batman group. They're cool. They're doing some brilliant stuff on the Amstrad. All right, I'm gonna bring this. Right, I found it. Of course, to say I'm gonna get a capture going. I'm gonna take you off the stream just for a minute, Richard. Don't worry, you'll be back. Bring a display capture up here. Here's me actually talking about this. Let's get the game going. There it is. This is on an Amstrad, real Amstrad, right now. So there's no sound or music yet. That's just like the. Oh, hang on. I need to skip this forward, I think.
Wow.
Okay, so that's like the choose your car section, and then
on a 6128.
I think it's a 6128, real 6128 apparently. Here we go. Huh. Check that out. It's only a short clip. It's only a little teaser.
Yeah, that's pretty teased.
Just to show you that one more time.
Oh, there we go. Yeah, nice.
Look at that. Woofed. They're saying 16-bit performance, and they've got a 3D CRTC FX engine they've done, and it's full overscan as well. Oofed. So there you go. Yeah, full overscan. Yeah.
That is quite crazy.
Yeah, there's a lot of people saying that they're lying. They're not going to pull this off, and all that kind of stuff.
I don't see why you would fake it, given that you know.
Exactly, your reputation's on the line here. You know.
Yeah, you wouldn't be bothered making the fake. I mean, no, I'm amazed that people are that into bringing the most out of old technology. I mean, I really enjoyed it at the time. I'm not sure I'd go back now, but I mean, because I have new technology, like right here. My desk is covered in new things.
Yeah, what does it actually do these days, Richard?
I do geeking. I still do geeking. I have so many. I just like can't even tell you how many. I mean, everything. I do like this. And, I mean, I do hardware stuff. I do hardware and firmware. So I do still low level stuff. Still, I mean, very occasionally some assembler or something, but practically never. Mostly just C. But yeah, microcontroller stuff. But I do everything from like the electronics to the microcontrollers to the Linux stuff, and then occasionally maybe some cloud stuff as well. Sure. The only thing I don't do is anything with a user interface. Any kind of user interface at all, no.
Not your thing.
No, well, it's because people never know what they want is the problem. And everyone has an opinion about user interface. Like what I like about doing hardware is that, like I did some wireless headphones at one point, which was really interesting technically. They were quite complicated and all sorts of good geeking. But the user interface was an LED and 2 buttons. And so the design document was like, make the LED flash when you push the button. And I was like, great, we can do that. And it was just worked out perfectly. And there was no backwards and forwardsing about whether the LED flashing was right or wrong, or could you make it faster or slower, or any of that stuff, or could you make the font bigger, or could you move it around a bit?
Yeah.
Could you make it more fun? And I mean, when you do video games, people come back with things like, can you make it more fun? Or like, I don't know, yeah. So I quit doing video games in about 2000 when I moved to the States. I had enough of it because really ultimately I'm into the technical stuff. I'm like, the fact that probably the funnest game I ever did was Shinobi, I think, because I like play it now and it's still like, yeah, that's a pretty fun game. Like the jumping is good and the timing is right and it's kind of a fun thing. But realistically, I'm more of a nerd than I am a games maker.
Sure, gotcha. Yeah, that's what gets you interested. Right, let's have a look at any other questions. Any chance of Fly Spy 2? No, I don't think so. Retrosheep, thank you for that question. Not a question for Richard, but just want to thank him for his many hours of hard work writing wonderful games like Fly Spy that we still love and play today. Thank you, Richard. Oh, that's a nice message. Yeah, actually, that's a good question. That actually leads me. I think someone else has got a similar follow-up question. It's like, what's your thoughts on that? The fact that there are like hundreds, if not thousands, of people still playing your games, talking about your games, and especially like your Amstrad games as well, not just Amiga, but there's like a community here that's going like, oh my god, you got Richard Aplin tonight, you're hero here, man. You know,
it's really strange.
Yeah.
It's really. I mean, I'm very flattered. It's really strange. I don't know. Yeah, how do I feel about it? I mean, I wasn't like super precious about any of them. They were like, I really enjoyed doing them. I really enjoyed working on the games. I really enjoyed releasing them. And it is amazing to see it 35 years later. There's people who spent time playing it when they were a kid. You know, I almost didn't think about other people. I was like, I'm going to make this game and I'm going to do all these interesting things. And then I moved on to something else. And yeah, it's great. I think I was in the right place at the right time. I mean, nowadays, there's just nowadays everyone programs. You know, it's like but I think at the time there were less people doing it, and I was incredibly lucky to be born at that time and have that energy as well of like being a teenager and just being fascinated by it and like just being so into it. And I think it's not that I'm super. People, I don't know. People occasionally go, "Oh, you're super clever" or something, but I'm not. What it is, I'm just very, very passionate about it, and you just spend a long time on it, and you don't let go because you just care about it a lot, and you want to know the fastest way to make the graphics go and the best way to do this, and that's really the interesting thing for me. And once I get to the point of like, I found the best way to do it, then I'm like, okay, cool, now I'm done, and then.
Yeah, exactly. I'm in a computing career as well, and it all starts from when I got my first Amstrad CPC. The manual that came with the 464 was brilliant. I mean, as an 8-year-old kid, I read it from front to back over and over and over, and I loved reading it. And I was like, right, I'm going to make games, and it was so easy to get into, especially with BASIC, and then you kind of like learn your basic stuff, and then think, oh, I'll start a bit of assembler now. And there was like free cover tapes with like assembly language stuff that you could just easily start
type in listings before that.
And type ins as well. Yeah, you could get instant results really, really quickly. And I feel like kids today, I'm going to sound like an old man, but they're kind of going to miss out on that a little bit, you know.
Well, I disagree because I have a kid who's 8.
Yeah.
And she's really into Minecraft, and it's. She doesn't necessarily like code mods yet, but she's particularly attracted to Minecraft because of that kind of flexibility in the programming it and the changing the world and all this kind of thing. And also you look at Unity, for example, right, which is free to download and is immensely powerful. And if you think about it, it's easier to write. If you have a game idea, it's easier to implement that in Unity than it's ever been in the history of computers to make a game really of any sort.
I suppose, yeah.
If you look at the help that's available to you, if you want physics, you just turn on physics and then things have physics. It's amazing. That blows my mind completely and you can do it in the browser now as well. Like you do WebGL in the browser, and you look at some of the WebGL demos, and they're incredible. They're like console level games and stuff now.
Yeah.
And I just marvel at how available that makes it for people, and it really has democratized it. It's wide open. I mean, a good example of this is you look at how many games there are in the iPhone store. Like a lot of people write games now.
Yeah. Still there. Sorry, questionnaire. What was the most must-have thing to buy when you had your first big paycheck at an early age back in the day?
I never had a big paycheck. Although, big paycheck as in compared to no paycheck at all. Like in the first one I got, the first thing I bought was an Amstrad disk drive. Definitely, yes, I remember that very clearly. I went down to WH Smith and bought an Amstrad disk drive, and then I could now save my source code and load it again when it crashed.
Great. Brilliant. Okay, just a few more questions and then we can let you go, Richard. Thank you very much for your time. I do appreciate it. We've asked that one already. Okay. I've
got a geeky toy here. I've got the Game Genie 2 here somewhere.
Oh, nice.
Only one in the world.
Game Genie 2?
Yeah, I might have lost it though. Oops, I think I just lost it.
Oh, God.
It's around here somewhere. Oh, here we go. Yeah, I have a slightly messy room. This is this was never released. So I worked on Game Genie for Codemasters, which is kind of later after I kind of mostly did games. I moved to Codemasters and did a bunch of hardware stuff, which was really fun. Oh, that's so fun. And that was like reverse engineering the Super Nintendo and the Game Boy and all that kind of thing. And then this was in order to do unlicensed games and also do the Game Genie as well, which was like already a fairly big hit by the time I turned up at Codemasters. And so I worked there for a while and I did various chips. I did the Game Boy Game Genie and I did. But I did a couple of others, but then I did this was my pride and joy. It's the Super Nintendo Game Genie 2.
Wow.
Which never made it beyond this form, and certainly doesn't. No one else has one. But basically, this is like, sorry about my crappy camera. So it uses there's a picture on Wikipedia as well, but this uses an FPGA, which is like a test chip basically. It's like costs £400.
It's fully programmable.
Yeah, field programmable gate array. Yeah, it's basically programmable logic chip. Yeah, and then and this one, so that this would get boiled down into a commercial chip that you put in a real product, but you can convert it from that to the cheap form. But what was kind of unusual about this is, so this is a prototype, obviously. So and the game plugged in here. So you plonk it in, like this is Super Nintendo, so it has the extra pins on the side.
Yeah.
Game plugs in the back, and then this has some extra stuff on it. So this has a logic analyzer port. So that plugs into a logic analyzer, which is basically like an oscilloscope for logic. And like you can basically see what's going on with the system bus, so you can see what's happening. And then this also has it did have an LCD that plugged in there, actually, a little 2-line LCD.
Yeah. And
this is also a port that goes to a PC as well as an interface chip as well. So basically, you can talk to it from a PC, and you can also look at what's happening on the data bus. So you can kind of have insight into what's going on inside the SNES, which is handy. But this is and some of that's for development. But the bits that were going to make it through to the final product were this bit, which is a RAM chip, right? So the previous game Genies didn't have RAM. This has 32K of RAM. Has a ROM, well, there's just an EEPROM here. Battery backup, which was kind of, hang on, I'm holding this the wrong way here.
Yeah.
We hold it like this. Right, there we go. So
yeah.
Battery back RAM, right, on this, unusually, and also 4 buttons as well, with 4 LEDs. So basically, the idea with this is, so that would make it into the product, right? The product has 4 buttons, 4 LEDs, battery back RAM, and chip, and it let you do lots of cool things because what this did, unlike the previous ones, would just let you patch ROM locations, right? So you could change the number of lives, or you could remove the instruction in the game that decremented your lives, for example.
Yes.
And that was a traditional game Genie, and I think the hardware usually we put in like 4, so you could alter 4 memory locations or something, 3 or 4 codes. And this worked very differently. This could patch the interrupt vector, right? So the Super Nintendo had a frame interrupt every frame, Okay. And this patched it in hardware, so basically it intercepted the whoops. It's fine.
It's like one of those rarest pieces of hardware just dropped on the floor, boys and girls.
Yeah, well, it's already got this chip hanging off already, that's actually this chip is actually known as a timing frig. It's written on there, because this is basically one of the timing paths inside this wasn't right. And because basically you can recompile these, right? So you can't develop software for these, only it's like hardware, software. And these are one-time programmable. So every time you program one of these, if you get it wrong, you have to throw it away. And they cost £300 each. So development was a bit painful. But basically, and also the other problem is that as you're developing it, it has all these pins, right? And you initially they're kind of undefined. You can just say, I want this pin for this and this pin for this and so on. But then as your design develops, it gets kind of fixed that way, and it becomes hard to move the pins around or change things. And so as you add things, sometimes you can get it all screwed up.
Right, gotcha.
It's kind of like you paint yourself in a corner a bit with the design, basically, and the circuit board and stuff. So anyway, so I got to the point where it wouldn't work anymore unless it had a delay added. And this chip hanging off here with the dead bug wires is just a logic gate which just delays the signal going through it a little bit, enough so that everything then worked on this particular prototype.
Sure.
But anyway, the interesting thing about this particularly was that it would it patched the interrupt vector in the game. So basically it was running alongside the game all the time. So every 60th of a second, it would intercept the game and start running code out of the ROM using its own RAM as well. So it didn't need to use any of the Super Nintendo RAM. It had its own RAM. And so basically it kind of ran a parallel program that was patched into the game all the time, which is very handy. You could do a lot with that.
Gotcha,
So we had stuff like you could you had 4 or more cheats on these buttons, right? And you could turn them on and off while the game was running just by pushing a toggle button, which is kind of handy. So if you had like a Mario invincibility or flying or turn into a squirrel or something, you could either trigger it one time or you could turn it on and off like that.
Yeah, gotcha.
Which clearly would have been fun. But then even better than that, I was thinking about it, having done that, and I was like, oh no, because we're kind of patched into the game, I just made it so you could turn the cheats on and off with joypad combinations while playing.
Ooh.
So you could be playing Super Mario World and run along, and then just push like a combination of buttons, and you just change into a different Mario instantly.
Oh really wow, that sounds so cool! How come it didn't get released then, or finished, or whatever?
It sucks that. Finished it, and it was awesome. Also, the main reason this had RAM was that it would you could find your own cheats, because as was done afterwards, basically what it would do is it had enough RAM that it could snapshot the Super Nintendo's internal memory. So in cheat finding mode, what you would do is stick a game in, and then you'd start off with the full number of lives, and you'd press the first button, and it would snapshot the game, and then you'd lose a life and press the second button, and then lose a life and press the third button, and then it would go ding, code found, kind of thing, and it would stop the game because it was patched into the game, and then you store your code in the RAM, and you'd be like, oh, I found a code, and you could tell other people. And the nice thing is it's stored in your RAM in here. And the nice thing is, of course, it recognized the game so in future when you plugged in the game and booted it, it would pop up with a list of your cheats that you had in RAM for that game.
Yeah.
So it was like you come up with like a cheat menu, including stuff you did and stuff other people did, and it would save the high scores out of the game as well. And there was a slow motion thing, so you could put the game in, you could pause it and you can put it in slow mo, so you could be running along and put the whole game to run at like quarter of normal speed with a joypad combination. So you could be running along and suddenly like that, and the game goes and then go back to normal speed again.
Oh, that's amazing!
Pretty cool.
So what happened then? Why didn't it get released in the end? Were they worried about legal issues or something? Or
they always had legal issues. I mean, they weren't necessarily that worried about them, which was the correct approach because they won most of their legal battles, although some of them were long and tedious and expensive.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, the biggest one was with Nintendo about everything. So doing their own unlicensed games, and also the game Genie was a big thing. So when I did the reverse engineering on this stuff, because they'd already been sued and spent a long time in court and a lot of money on lawyers, I had to keep like diaries of everything I did. And the trickiest bit was that when I did the Super Nintendo, because I had to reverse engineer most of it to get this working, I wasn't allowed to have any games. So I had a Super Nintendo with no games or no cartridges at all, right? And the Super Nintendo doesn't have a ROM in it either, right? So you turn it on, it doesn't do anything at all. It just sits there with a black screen. Yeah. And they were like, there you go. I was like, that seems a bit mean. I mean, like kind of at least look at some games to see what the hell, how the hell you do anything, or how you even program this thing or anything. And they were like, no, because if you do that, that's copyright infringement. Because they got done by that before, because it turns out that if you make copies of it, if you disassemble the ROM, you're making an unauthorized reproduction of that, and it's actually a translation, right? Because you're taking it from binary form and turning it into source code by disassembling it, and that's even worse. That's even worse because then it's an unauthorized derivative work at that point, right? So it's like there's a special copyright law to screw people who try and rip off your stuff and then change it a little bit, and it's even worse, right? And they had that. So anyway, the end result of that was no, you can't have any games at all to run on it. And so I had a Super Nintendo that sat there with a blank screen when you turned it on, and I still managed to reverse engineer it, which was fun, but it just was harder. And we didn't figure out mode 7 and some other stuff, but we got all the sound chip, but we got all the rest of it.
Oh, fantastic! Oh, that's brilliant.
Anyway, so the reason to cut a long story, the reason this didn't come out, which is a tremendous shame because it was very good, if I say so myself, was that the market kind of died. It was the PlayStation 1 was starting to come out. I think must have been about that time, about the PS1 maybe launched, that kind of thing, or like late. It was late in the SNES cycle basically.
Yeah.
And they also, I think, had some fallings out with Galoob, who were the US manufacturer, and there were a combination of issues, basically. Also, I think Galoob had too much, they might have had too much stock of the first one still in a warehouse, that kind of thing, which really sucks, but that's the way it is.
Yeah. Oh.
I hope this still works, but I figure it probably doesn't because there was no EEPROM label on the EEPROM.
Right.
I should type over that probably.
And don't drop it again, please. Everyone in the chat was like, no.
It would be cool if it worked. Yeah, I was talking to the guy who wrote the software for that, and he said he has a copy of the EEPROM somewhere, or which amazes me, but So I might try it one day. I'll get a SNES and try it.
That'd be interesting.
And it probably won't work.
Well, that'll be a good video for your channel as well. So. Guys, do we have anything else left to ask Richard? There's some lovely comments coming in and stuff like that. There's what. It's just there's too much in the chat. I think we got through most of the important questions. No, he's not going to do Fly Spy 2. Retrosheep. That's not going to happen.
I saw some people got together and were redoing Amiga Final Fight. And right. some guys started doing it. Yeah, some guys started doing it in Blitz Basic and came some of the way. And every now and then people talk about, I don't know, oh, what was it? Somebody else. Oh, someone's redoing the graphics in Shinobi. Did you see that?
On the Amstrad.
Yeah, on the Amstrad.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I think I saw something like that. Cyril,
like
Cyril probably know that. Yeah. Cyril, you know about that stuff. Say so in the chat if you're still here, mate. Yeah, I did hear about that. Yeah, I think the only negative thing I ever hear about Shinobi and Double Dragon is that their graphics look a little bit messy at times and stuff like that.
Yeah, the colour palette was a bit whack.
Yeah. Was that you doing the graphics? So have I just insulted you?
No. I mean, they weren't. The color palette was a bit extreme. No, someone else did the graphics. I wasn't. The only game I ever did the graphics was Fly Spy.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just want to mention Dr. Destructo, which was the Islands of Dr. Destructo. Someone else did that on the Amstrad, and I converted it to the Commodore 64.
Ah, yeah, because I remember I emailed you ages ago about that in Killer Cobra, if you remember. We chatted about that briefly. Yeah, you got credited for Dr. Destructo. It's actually one of my favourite ever games on the Amstrad. It's
quite a good game, that. Yeah, it's a pleasure to convert.
It's really good fun.
Cleverly written as well. It actually constructed, all the ships were built algorithmically, as I remember. It had some really clever algorithm for building ships. It had millions of different ships that you could fly over. Anyway.
Ah, right, fair enough. Okay. Okay, we'll leave it. We'll leave it about there. We'll give you a break, Richard. Thank you very much for your time. Everyone's been very, very excited and happy to have you here, and really, really, really enjoyed your stories. Even the non-Amstrad bonds as well, because we are an Amstrad community here. But it's been very fascinating. Any final thoughts on Fly Spy and the Amstrad CPC 464 you want to leave us with, maybe?
I'm amazed that anybody in this century has finished Fly Spy, or is even still playing it, which
me.
Makes me very happy. I know, good job. I mean,
we're going to try and finish it
bizarre
later.
And pleasing, and I'm glad that, and it's amazing that people. I mean, I'd forgotten about references to my friend's girlfriend and stuff. Also, there's those rants as well. My rants that I put in games in the spare space, the text and stuff that people have found.
Oh yes, that's become quite
totally
legendary.
Make me cringe. I'm like, oh man, I was so young, and look at this gap.
I've just remembered. Someone was mentioning this earlier. Yes, you're in a Larry Bundy Jr. video. Have you heard of him, Larry Bundy? Right. Well, I'll send you a link offline late tomorrow or something like that. He's done it was like a top 10 programmer breakdown rants or something like that. You're in it.
Yes, I did a few, and I think the silliest bit was in Final Fight. Had that bit where you could cut to the other sequence, and it had me with a video. It's
you were in the game,
Final Fight bit.
Yeah. Your pictures in the game. I remember that as well. I've seen that picture. I'm just looking at the map here. You've got quotes here from Shakespeare's The Twelfth Night in the Fly Spy map. You've got Frank Bruno was here. Know what you mean, Harry? Not many people younger than us will remember that.
Very dated,
yeah. Vicky's vicious vertical bit. That's your friend's girlfriend, wasn't it? I think you told me the other day. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that was Kate. I think was his friend's girlfriend, and Vicky was this girl that I liked at school.
Ah, yes. Oh, bless you.
Literally that young.
Well, Richard, thank you very, very much for talking to us. It's been an absolute pleasure and honour. I'm going to take a little break now myself, and then I'm going to come back and try and finish your bloody Fly Spy.
Oh man, good luck with that.
Thank you, man.
I recommend cheating.
So, Richard, take care, my friend. Well, hopefully we'll speak again soon sometime.
Thank you for remembering me. It's amazing and very sweet. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Take care, and we'll see you. Hopefully, see you in the chat. Cheers. Bye. And there we go, guys. Oh, my mic's a bit loud now. I had to turn the mic up earlier there. That was Richard Aplin there. What a really, really, really cool dude there. Guys, I'm sorry I had to I missed. Obviously, I couldn't talk to you guys in the chat because I was talking to Richard, and I had to let him talk. He was talking some very, very interesting stuff there. And sorry, is my mic a bit loud now? I had to turn it up for you guys. I did see your message about the mic being a bit loud, so I did tweet that. Guys, I really hope you enjoyed that interview. He stayed and chatted to us for a lot longer than I thought he would tonight. And what a great guy! You can really sense his enthusiasm for all things geeky and hardware and maybe games to an extent as well. But what a great dude, and it was lovely having him here. I found his stories about the oh god, I've got the name of it. The SNES device, Game Genie 2. I found that really interesting. I know one or two people were like, come on, we want to hear about Amstrad stuff, but be respectful, guys, in the future. But no worries at all.